Evelina, I'll press the record to the cloud.
Okay, great. I'm leaving the call now, and I wish you good luck and have a nice discussion.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Evelina, you will have to, yeah, okay, so I guess we are live on. All right, so welcome to our last episode of the season. We had a wonderful time over the last 3 months. We've debated different aspects of future of global shared services and business services. And now, as we approach the final episode, it's been a very, very interesting, at the same time, learning journey. We learned a lot over the course of the last 3 weeks 3 months. And what a better way than to talk about AI, artificial intelligence, in the last episode. So this literally crossroads between what happened in the past versus what's going to happen in the future. So as you know, artificial intelligence has existed for decades. In fact, I remember during my university days, in my engineering school, I had AI as one of my subjects. And back then, I already found it very, very interesting. Fast forward close to 30 years. We see that now, especially over the past 5 to 10 years, AI has taken a traction in the market, thanks to sort of massive computing abilities, to the super fast nature of computing that's available. AI has become a force to reckon with right now. While there are a lot of people who are embracing AI with open arms, there are at the same time a large number of skeptics that believe that AI is going to destroy the jobs ecosystem. So, and one of the areas where AI can play a substantial role in an organization is typically a human resource centric function, like a global shared services. And that is going to be the topic for our discussion today. So without further ado, let me invite upon our two esteemed panelists. Gopi Kotiswaran, all the way from Chennai, literally flew in this morning to Chennai, and then Raymond Devadas from day 3, all the way from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. So Gopi, will start with an introduction of you, and then we will go to Raymond.
Yeah, thanks, Anirudh. It's great to come back again. I think I was there in one of the initial sessions when we were talking about analytics, and now we are looking at AI. And so let me just share a little bit of background about myself, which is, I was in technical school followed by business. So I've been CEO of the wearables business for Philips, based out of Netherlands, and most recently of CEO of Latent View Analytics, which went IPO in the Indian markets a few months ago. Although I've spent most of my time as a business leader, in my core of core, I'm a serious nerd. So AI, neural networks, and all these things are of great interest. And what I spent the past week in Amsterdam, I indeed met Anirudh briefly before flying out of Amsterdam, looking at different companies. And, I met with this company called Ancora Health. That's actually trying a digital health platform, trying to transform healthcare by empowering the consumer. And there's a lot of bioinformatics and a lot of AI involved in this. So hopefully today I'll be able to touch upon some of those very interesting futuristic trends that I see. But I'm also closely associated with Robert Bosch Center for Data Science and AI, which is the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras multidisciplinary data science school. So it's my alma mater, and there are some fantastic, great ideas out there. And it's a relatively recent school, about 4 or 5 years old, but we are trying to help that get global. So we have very good work happening there, and hopefully, and if some of you are interested, I can also connect you to the professors there, because then you can start implementing whatever you have in your mind rather than just talking about AI. With that a short introduction, I'll stop, but we'll get to interact during the course of this discussion. Thanks, Anirban.
Absolutely, Gopi. And I know that you've got so many interesting stories to share, both from the business world as well as the technology area. So we're looking forward to the discussion. For those of you who are joining us through the LinkedIn Live or through YouTube Live, if you have questions, don't forget to post them in there. We've got a moderator who would be screening both the platforms if there are any questions. So there may be a bit of a delay because of the lag between the different medium, but as and when you have the questions, just put them in and we'll try to answer them as well. And now let me bring upon our second panelist. And every time I see him, I just get inspired for two reasons. One, of course, is his beard, and the second is about his company. Now, we're not going to spend much time about talking about his beard, but I would like to understand and hear the interesting story behind his company name called Day3.
Thanks,
Raymond, over to you.
Anirban. Thanks, Anirban. While you speak about my beard, and before I'm labeled an expert, let me first out put a disclaimer. While you were studying AI in the 70s, I probably wasn't born yet. So, so you definitely have your way ahead of me and, have more experience in AI than myself. So I'll put the disclaimer out first before, I get sued for anything else. But having said that, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here, and numerous conversations that we have had, recently and also over the years, it's always been thought-provoking conversation that we have had. I have been in the BPO space, as you would call it. You're more familiar with it. Of course, now we talk about GBS industry for a little more than 15 years now. And really this business today, if I put it in the Malaysian context, we have a very small population of 30 million people, of which about 50% of the people really contribute to the economy. So it's a very small business that we have here, a small industry compared to some parts of the world. Having said that, today I run one of the largest BPO firms in the country. We provide a very niche and boutique solution, delivering insights and innovation-driven CX. And why this is so important for us, and this topic really resonates, and something very close to my heart. I'm an accountant by profession, as and spent my formative years as an accountant more than anything else, and more better with numbers than with programming, I suppose. But having said that, one thing I quickly realized in this industry, when you only have 15 million population working in the industry, how do you compete with the likes of some of the other BPO or the GBS countries that are, that also are in the similar industry providing similar services? And for us to be able to scale up is a big challenge because the population is very small. And therefore, when I started this business, my mind was always tuned to how can I do more with less? And that has always been the formula, and that's always been driving me right from the very beginning. How can I do more with less? Because I can't just, I can't be a father to many, so there's a limitation to that. So having said that, technology has been something very close to my heart and something that I've been searching for, that what works in the GBS space, what works well for us. So a little bit of background, so I started this business. I got involved in this business 15 years ago, but about 5 years ago, I actually did a management buyout of the organization. And, you asked me the name Day3, the first answer I always tell people is it takes me 3 days to tell you the story, but I'll try to give it to you in 30 seconds. It was essentially the third phase of my life, from a professional accountant to a corporate manager, involved in 10 years in finance and 10 years in various IT organizations. And when I started this business and I did this buyout, it was the third phase of my life of attempting to become an entrepreneur. I wasn't a born entrepreneur. I evolved to that role, I suppose, over a period of 30 years. And it was the third phase of my life. So I said, why not just call it Day3? It would resonate. It made sense to everyone. It made sense to me. And that's how the name came about, Day3. As simple as that. So yeah, so that's a little bit about myself, and I'll pause here, and then we'll speak a little more as we go on.
Brilliant, brilliant. I love every time I hear the story, it still, sounds fresh and new. And I just love the third phase and the connection with day three, and I'm sure a lot of us will be able to associate with that. Now going on to the topic, and what we find is literally the world has got polarized between the AI fills and the AI phobes, people who love the work that's been done in AI, and they don't necessarily treat artificial intelligence as artificial intelligence, but for them, it is an augmented intelligence. It's essentially getting your workforce to do faster, better, and new, innovative stuff compared to the others. Whereas the other group essentially sees AI as a threat to their own existence through their own jobs. And especially when it comes to GBS, which in many cases operate on a very cost-centric model which is based or whose roots are based in, let's say, the 20th century functional orientation of an organization. Should these shared services and BPO companies look at AI as a threat, or should they look at as an opportunity to be able to grow and offer more services and better services for the client? So Gopi, I see you smiling. So we'll start with you.
Yeah, so before directly addressing this question, I just want to take a step back to explain what I see as the AI era companies or the new age companies that are cropping up, right? Business 4.0, there are different names going around, but the way I look at it is some of the core business decisions, critical decisions that you make for your business in these companies are made by algorithms, or it's not humans making those decisions. So if you say recommending songs on Spotify, right, which is the core of Spotify, that's not done by human beings. Or if you take allocating cars or assigning cars in Uber, it is done by an algorithm. Or if you're familiar with the Chinese company Ant Financials, part of the big group, the how do you call that? Qualifying the borrowers and while lending, it's done by algorithms, right? There are a few of these companies that have come into existence, which are where the core businesses, the core decision making is done by algorithms and not by human beings, right? And those are the ones that are causing the major worry amongst the public, saying, oh my God, what happens to all the jobs and what happens? There are a few industries and few businesses that are conducive for this, where you have large amounts of data and your decisions are fairly allocation of something to someone based on specific criteria, recommending songs or assigning cars or qualifying borrowers. These are things that can be done, and these are the areas where AI is just taken off, or the whole business is built with fewer individuals than normal, right? If you leave these few companies aside, right, and there could be more coming and transforming your business, whichever business you are in. So it's that's something that no one can predict. However, if you leave some of these new AI era companies aside, and if you focus on a large majority of organizations, right, the human skill has to get enhanced using AI. So if you take a highly skilled robotic surgeon, and in the midst of their surgery, AI could, you're 80% sure what you want to do, and there's no one else to ask for help. You're on your own. You're dealing with the patient. You're very good. You've been doing this for many years, but you still probably have that element of doubt on, should I be doing this or that? And you're thinking about it, and you could potentially have an AI saying, in 85% of the past cases at this point, this particular approach has worked better. So that gives you the confidence and the support as a highly skilled robotic surgeon to make that decision during during the course of the surgery. I'm just giving you this extreme example saying that AI could enhance the skills of even highly skilled human beings. But in most places, it could enhance how we work, or we make us more effective, and probably use our skills to do something where we are more relevant and where the human skills are the creativity and where you can do things. And the boring stuff, which probably does not require human things, I think that could be enhanced by AI, right? So that's kind of, so in the, excluding a few specific cases, in most cases, it's going to be a combination of human beings and AI. But my understanding of where we are today, our data is so bad. I mean, in general, I'm sure in some places it's very good. The quality of data, what we have is so bad that the decisions AI makes today in real life is fake. And I'd much rather have a human being check that before it goes out in most cases. And so there is a combination of the AI and human beings, and that will last for a long time. I don't see it going away in the short term because the quality of data, the way the decisions are being made, and however, the need for augmenting human skills is very necessary, both at the highest level as well as at every level in the continuum. So that's kind of how I see it, Anirban. I think the combination of humans and AI is what the future is going to be, except for a few cases where it's very clear that the business model, the core of the business model is being done by AI, in which case human beings would just mess it up, especially if you're dealing with millions of consumers and millions of decision-making points, and the AI deals with it really well. But other than those cases, in most other parts, AI will augment and support the human beings rather than compete with them in any way.
Yeah, very interesting perspective. In fact, it kind of reminded me of one episode. So this particular company had implemented an AI-based recruitment software or solution. I wouldn't even call it software because it was a combination of a few things there. And then a few months down the line, they were like, AI does not work for them. And the problem was, it's not the AI solution that didn't work for them. They didn't have good quality data. And people have a tendency of blaming the system, the structure, rather than the input, which determines the output. So, but we'll talk more about on these examples a bit later. Raymond, what's your take on the topic?
Well, I couldn't agree with Gopi, more than anything else, in the sense that, there is a need for this symbiotic relationship between bots and humans. Your question reminds me of the early days, in mid 2000 when I was introducing RPA into the industry in this space. I had so much of resistance from agencies, government agencies, because their KPI was creation of jobs. And I gave you a little bit of background about the economy, where only 15 million people contribute to the economy. Can you imagine bots coming in and taking over jobs? A lot of people's KPIs would be affected. But I think the fear that you spoke about, Anirban, is so real. It is so real, and I think it is different in different circumstances, probably in different countries, different regions, because they have different needs. But the fear is so real, and it takes a lot of education, and it takes a lot of, conversations like this to happen before, for it to be embraced. And, lo and behold, 5 years later, they come back and say, hey, Raymond, can you talk about this topic that, we ostracized you in the early days for? But I think, it is so true. And again, I come back to the work that I do in delivering CX for people, right? And I always tell my people this, there are 5 things that I insist on in delivering excellent CX. Number 1 is empathy. Number 2 is trust. Number 3 is passion, right? And then there are 2 other things, which is equally important, which is the innovations and the insights. But these 2 I's, the innovation and the insights, is where the machines come in, is where the machine, your machine learning, your algorithm is what we speak, right? We want to make sure that we give accurate answers to our stakeholders. We want to make sure that their problems are resolved. We want to give them insights into some of the real problems that they face. but the bot or any machine for that matter will not be able to deliver the empathy, will not be able to deliver the same kind of passion, and will not be able to foster that kind of trust with your stakeholders. So I think you know, and when you put these 5 components together, right, you know, they're all equally important. But I think each have a role to play. And as Gopi said, in years to come, you're going to see them working together. And I think that is it. You know, that to deliver that kind of experience, you need that 5 elements. And therefore, there's only so much humans can do with loads of data, right? And you need to work along with these machines to deliver the kind of experience, you know, you want to. So I'm just trying to give an example to bring it back close to home for me at least. But it is, I think, like 2 things to note is that the fear is real. But again, you know, it really, the conversation has to take place at multiple levels.
That absolutely makes sense. And in fact, what I'm also hearing from you is the augmentation side of the artificial intelligence. You know, it's like, how can it empower individuals to be able to do a better job, to be able to provide a better solution. Now, AI.
Sorry to jump in. I just want to elaborate a little bit of what Raymond just said, right? So I think he's hit it on the nail, right? Because I think so it's like empathy, trust, and passion, which are all soft skills compared to the insights and innovation that he's talking about. I mean, those are the you know, easier ones. And I totally agree with you, Raymond, the way you package it. I'll just give one example of this so that it drives it home. So if you take a case of these wealth advisors or your robo advisors that they have, which can help you with managing your portfolio, a personal portfolio in some form or the other, they do a great job, you know, in algorithms and making sure you have it right. But the biggest support the individual needs is when, for whatever reason, your portfolio has crashed or you've lost a lot of wealth today, right? And the algorithms and the robo advisors or whatever, they're not able to help the individual at that point. So if you do have a relationship manager, the old-fashioned relationship manager, they'll usually come in and say, Gopi, it's not just you. Raymond and Anirban have lost a lot of wealth, right? It's a simple thing to say. And then I'm like, oh, okay, if Anirban and Raymond have lost a lot of wealth, at least I'm not alone. Not that the facts change or anything has changed. As Raymond put it beautifully, the empathy, trust, passion. So what you get when you just like lost, let's say, tons of money today and you feel bad, and a human being coming and talking to you about it, and he or she is not changing anything, but it's more providing you with the empathy that you need at that point. Even in a simple financial thing, nothing changes. But so that's what, unless you have that, your insights and innovation, right, which or performance indicators, whatever the metrics are. And if this is the case for an individual, then for a larger organization, it's no difference, which is just made of a bunch of individuals, right? So without I think, Raymond, you nailed it beautifully. I mean, so I hope you don't have a copyright on this, so I can use it the next time I speak to people. Because without the empathy, trust, and passion, all your hard skills, your metrics, and all of that are useless, because that's when your client really understands, and they need to explain it to their organization and move forward on that. And we are miles away from AI taking that part of it over, right? It might happen in science fiction movies, but in our lifetimes, you're not going to see AI take over some of those elements, which are very, very human elements. So I just felt what Raymond said was so great. So I just wanted to give some example and elucidate it so that you can go on. I don't know. So I just wanted to jump in on that.
Sure. No, excellent points. And in fact, I couldn't agree more with you guys on the empathy, trust, and passion. In fact, last year, we had this lady. I mean, she specializes in audio CX, customer experience, and she was narrating the story about how different companies have taken a leap further towards becoming more empathetic. Again, to get to that level of sophistication where uh, artificial intelligence will be as empathetic as human beings, it's probably not going to happen in our lifetime. It's not going to happen in our life. Not probably. It's not going to happen. But organizations or technology advances are taking place. So she said, she gave some examples, and one of the examples was the voice that somebody associates with KFC of Colonel Sanders is a deep grandfatherly voice, whereas the voice that people associate with Nike is a more youthful, exuberant. So, and that is now coming up pretty interestingly and pretty significantly. So the conversation was Alexa versus Siri. Which one shows more empathy versus the other one. And I'm not going to, I'll give an answer here on this forum, but there was a very interesting debate that was taking place around the empathy part, saying that even there things have started changing. But again, let's go back to, because this discussion is around the GBS and the world of shared services and BPO. Why do people fear AI, and why do they think that AI is going to take away jobs? What's the thinking behind it? Is there some truth in it, or are just people scared about the new change? What are some of your thoughts? So maybe Raymond, you can maybe throw some light on that one.
I think is that human fear, right? I think we've gone through it. I know Gopi mentioned our business 4.0, right? We've gone this 3 times before already. We've gone through this. This is the 4th time, And I bet you every single generation, obviously they didn't have an open conversation like this because there was no Zoom and internet and stuff like that at that point in time. But I'm sure our forefathers had the same conversation in a coffee shop, I can imagine the fear that my dad was a clerical staff. I remember him bringing the abacus home, right? I can imagine, the day when they told him that, oh, there's a calculator now that you can use a calculator and you don't need the abacus anymore. I'm sure this conversation took place back in the 60s or 70s, right? Will I be needed? Will my job be, will I still be relevant? I think that same conversation, is happening now. And human nature, sometimes we don't want to change. We fear, we don't want to take that leap forward. Hey, I need to upskill. I need to reskill to be relevant. I think that complacency, and talking about complacency, I think it was, if I can't remember, was it Gary Kasparov when they interviewed him after he beat the machine in chess, Deep Blue was in IBM. I remember him saying, he said something to the effect that, machines will not make you obsolete, right? But your complacency is what will make you obsolete. So I think that fears at different levels, governments are afraid that their population will be out of a job, individuals and family and probably, household heads are fearful for their jobs. And I think at different levels, people have different fears. But the younger ones are embracing it, right? The younger ones are embracing this change. And I think that's human nature. I just feel, it's just human nature. It's again, overcoming it. I think we have gone through this before, and we will go through this again. I'm very sure. And I think we're just riding the wave now, going through the motion right now. That's it.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think that absolutely makes sense. And human beings have this tremendous reticence and ability to bounce back and able to reinvent themselves. In fact, if you look at the overall sort of GDP and the number of jobs, it has only grown. It's over the number of years. Having said that, we also know that when automotives or automobiles were commercialized, they started replacing horse carriages, horse-drawn carriages, and the drivers of horse-drawn carriages had to reinvent themselves and become, in some cases, automobile drivers or taxi drivers, right? What are some of the jobs, or what are some of the kind of roles that in the shared services world, or in the, let's call them the back office functional work, finance, HR, IT, are likely to be replaced as part of an AI, let's say, revolution? And what are the jobs that are still going to be there, irrespective of whether it's AI or any other technology enhancement? So, Gopi, you.
I will refer that because Raymond spoke about the RPA. Maybe he could start off on that, and then I'll jump into that one if you're okay with that.
Yeah, sure. Sure. This reminds me of another story. I think, if you go to Google and if you type, now Google is going to answer this. I'm not going to answer this, I suppose. But if you go to Google and type, will a robot take your job? Within your first or two, your first or two or three searches in the list, you'll find a very nifty calculator that BBC had created. And I think they had used this data from I think it was with Deloitte and with Oxford University, and they did this survey, and then BBC came up with this very nifty calculator. And when I speak in conferences, I like to use this as an example because fear really sells, right? And you walk into a room filled with accountants, all my peers from my industry, and I say, hey, look, why don't you type chartered accountant, see what happens? Right? 97% chance that your job will be taken over by a bot in the next 25 years or 30 years, right? And then try typing engineer, see what happens, and then you see, okay, why not you type, you've typed certified public accountant, 97% chance, but why don't you type finance director, what happens, right? The chances now drop from 97 to 2 to 3%, right? And then, and if you type solicitors again at a very low level, probability of it being taken over by a bot. So again, I think if you look at the difference between the two, right? And Gopi spoke about this earlier, right? It's that human factor, the emotional factor, the ability to interpret information. And I suppose between a CPA, a bookkeeper, and a finance director, the difference is one is interpreting the data. The other one is producing reports. So that's where the difference is, I feel, and the new skill sets are going to come in now, and new jobs are going to be created. Who thought that we were going to deploy data scientists in GBS companies? Today we are doing that. We never thought about it 10 years ago. When I got into this business, that we never even thought about it, that I would be hiring data scientists. And really, I think the emotional intelligence bit, that is going to be so important, and that's where new jobs are going to come from. And really, what's going to happen? And as you said, the RPA stuff. At the moment, at least, right? We all know, although a lot of us call it an intelligent bot, but how many of us are using it in an intelligent way? Not yet. A lot of us are still using it as a transactional bot more than anything else, right? And we are building data to make it more intelligent. That's it. Right? We're on the way to making it intelligent. Reading OCR documents to me is not that intelligent yet, but some people like to call it intelligent. But again, it's just a matter of definition at the end of the day, right? But I suppose the intelligence bit is when you need the EI, the emotional intelligence bit, when you need to begin to interpret, when you begin to understand different scenarios, and that's where I feel the new jobs are going to be. I'll pause here, and I'll probably come back to you later again.
Yeah, no, fair enough, Raymond. I mean, you made valid points, and one of those things that I'm seeing is the upskilling, right? Which is, Anirban started off by saying he did AI courses many decades ago, right? And the reason AI did not pick up, and I still remember about 10 years ago, if you go to a conference and there were AI experts, nobody was listening to them, right? So they were in one corner of the room, and nobody was listening to them. It's only in the past few years of hype, they've come right in the front, and everyone wants to go and attend an AI conference and so on, but the fundamentals needed for it have not yet changed. So if I see the data quality of most organizations, it's difficult for a human being to make sense out of it. And it's impossible for an AI system to actually come up with something concrete with this kind of data. So the basics are not yet in place. And also there are a few examples which worries the population from AI being used. One of those things is AI was used in identifying the quality of some products moving out, right? So out of the manufacturing line, and the AI got only 3 wrong amongst 1,000 pieces. So it's a good system, but when they saw what was wrong, the 3 pieces that were wrong, one was broken into 2, right? So it was not just a small error. So AI was really good at identifying the small error, but when there were 2 pieces there, it just couldn't identify it, because in the training set given to the AI, no such thing was shown to them, right? So the AI did not get. So the 3 that AI got wrong, a 10-year-old child would have got it right. So that was it. And the public got really wild, saying, your AI appears smart, the numbers are all great, but even I could have told you that these 3 things are wrong. So, why couldn't AI figure it out? AI is as good as what our training sets are, right? So it doesn't have this ability, and it'll take a long time. If you hear someone saying it's got that ability, it's going to take a long time before it can say something like, so if I say I used to live in Kuala Lumpur 15 years ago, and Raymond's in Kuala Lumpur right now, and I can have a conversation with him about, let's say, a nice coffee shop in the Bangsar area, which will connect the 2 of us. But AI, you have to give that training set to it, and it can only think out of that training set. It cannot do connections which the human mind can do. And that's why we are able to figure out some of the silly problems of AI very easily. A 10-year-old child would point out that this is wrong, whereas the AI needs to be trained significantly before it gets to that point. So there are always going to be gaps in what AI can do. And of course, the AI, I would say it's going to be only 3 mistakes in 1,000. But when you see those 3 mistakes, you could cause a lot of public panic if you see the 3 mistakes, and it just causes a lot of chaos. So before AI can go to a point where it can actually replace human beings and can be treated as an expert, there's a long way to go. And the other example that Raymond gave, which is about the voice and human. So even now, today, if there's a phone call that I receive and I pick it up, I take a few seconds to figure out whether that's a human being or not, right? And I feel I will crack it. I mean, maybe I don't get it in 3 seconds, but if I speak to it for 20 seconds, however intelligent that is, be it Amazon or Google, who's on the other side, I think I can just ask a few questions to figure out whether that's a human being or not. And my behavior changes instantaneously the moment I know it's not a human being. For whatever reason, I'm hardwired that way, right? If it's a human being, I don't want to sound silly and I don't want to sound arrogant and all of those things. But I know if it's a machine, then I'll make fun of it. I will do whatever I feel like doing. And, it's like, so I might just say, Siri, you're stupid. I can figure this out and you cannot figure it out. Then Siri would respond in a very, very polite way, which says, you did not share all the facts with me or something of that nature. I would never say that to a human being, right? So inherently, the human mind is still looking at a human interaction. And when there is a human interaction, the way we behave, at least the way I behave, is very different if I figure out it's a machine on the other side, in which case I'm like, very factual, give me the points and get lost. But if it's a human being, then there's something in me which says I've got to be reasonable, I've got to be polite, I've got to make sure that I'm not hurting the feelings of this real human being on the other side, even though I might be upset. I want to have a conversation which because that person's doing the job to the best of their ability, and I want to. So that element is not going to go away, right? I mean, it's so you're going to be functional, practical, and you want to get the info that you need, for which Google search helps a great deal, and it's driven purely by AI behind it. But for most other parts, if I want to have an interaction, it's going to be the human element will come in, and it can be enhanced by AI, so that, like the first example I gave of a robotic surgeon, their effectiveness can go up when AI helps them. But I would still, I would still see at least the next few years, if not decades, the human element playing a really, really big role. And the changing of skill sets, when I see the young folks getting into the workplace or starting their own things, are coming into the workplace now, they don't have this fear. I don't think any of them are asking these questions. All they're asking for is, what should I learn? What skill set should I acquire? And what are the things that I should do? And age should not be a factor. You have Coursera, you have a few other things that are NPTEL, which is a very IIT Madras driven thing, but it's got all the courses for free. And as long as you don't have complacency and you don't have fear, you can be ahead of the curve very quickly with all the resources that are available. And you should start off by saying, you bring something to the table, nothing can replace. That should be the confidence that we bring to the table. I can assure you, if you start with that confidence and you start acquiring knowledge, this is fairly simple stuff. So you'll be ahead of the curve. You'll be driving this change rather than being affected by the change in any way. I mean, that's my personal view very clearly, that irrespective of where you are, you can benefit from this immensely, and do not be worried about it, and just take that extra effort, overcome the complacency, and do the things that's needed, so that you're in the driver's seat and you're not receiving stuff from others.
Do you think it's a generational issue? Because baby boomers or Gen X versus millennials, because Gen Z and millennials, they're more likely to interact with the machine, and have a conversation than we are, or most of us are. So what do you think, Raymond? You definitely have more gray hair than me, so
looks can be deceiving. Well, I think, as Gopi rightly pointed out just now, right? I mean, he would rather have a conversation with a human being. But I think it's also definitely our generation as well. We are so used to it, very relationship based. Of course, the younger generation, as I see in my kids, is also that they are glued. It's so difficult to get them away from their devices. It's always a constant battle of trying to get them away from their devices. They're so glued on, onto it. And now with the metaverse, it makes it even more difficult. I suppose it's $1 million question, whether they will prefer eventually, if we have the same conversation 10 years down the road, they might say, I'd rather talk to a machine than a human being. I just want the facts. I just want plain facts. I don't need the emotions attached to it. It could be a different thing altogether in the next 10 to 15 years, but I hope not. I hope as a society we don't head towards that direction, because that I think as human beings we thrive and live based on strong relationships, and I really hope, to your question, and everyone, that doesn't become a reality. That as much as I do a lot of work in AI, as much as I do a lot of work in machine learning and stuff like that, I hope that we don't get into that space, honestly.
That makes sense. And in fact, this is going to be a debate which is at least going to last for the next few years for sure, as we go through this transition from baby boomers retiring and Gen Z joining the workforce. Now, let's broaden the horizon a bit, right? So the reality is that AI is at the forefront of driving this business 4.0 and the subsequent versions, right? There are a lot of things that are taking place in the wider world, right? There are also opportunities for businesses to adopt and adapt these changes the way they're taking place. And then it comes to the opportunity for shared services, whether this is something that they should step in versus not. So I think, Raymond, you talked about data scientists, right? And in our prior discussions, we've had this debate on whether data scientists should be part of GBS or global shared services or not, because this is not a traditional skill that shared services has. Interestingly, we did not get a consensus on either or, because there were people who would say, yeah, data scientists should be in shared services, because at the end of the day, shared services are human resource rich functions. On the other side, they're like, we're so cost focus driven, and we get measured by KPIs, which are again on efficiency and timeliness and all of that stuff. Data science does not fall in that category, and therefore it should not be part of the shared services remit. So, but let's look at the overall development that's taking place in the wider world. Is that an opportunity for GBS to step in or not? And this is something, Kopi, you and I, we spoke yesterday.
Yeah.
Let's look at some of the wider developments that are taking place, and how, in your opinion, shared services of this world should take advantage of.
I mean, I think it's fairly simple. It's that there are some transformational changes taking place in the business world. Now, if GBS is not taking the lead in it, right, it will no longer be relevant in the future. I mean, it's fairly black and white. Right now, they're adding tons of value to the organization. Therefore, they're doing well. But if the newer value is going to be added by data scientists and by proactively looking at insights and innovation and driving insights and innovation for the main businesses, then you need that knowledge and data for you to deliver this. And so you have to, whether you like it or not, you have to proactively invest in this, because your customers, your direct clients are looking for insights and innovation and deliverables that makes sense. And it cannot be 5 years later that GBS says we do not have data scientists and we don't have this skill sets, and therefore we will only deliver this kind of some other kind of because of your metrics. So you have to push back as GBS, make the investments needed, and you have to be a partner to the business leader, right? I mean, unless you're a partner to the business leader and unless you're driving this change, you're not going to be very relevant. And I will give a totally, separate example where, in India, we have a 1 billion plus population right now. And every time I go to a doctor, they look at me afresh, right? So it's like, even the same doctor who's seen me earlier, maybe 2 years ago or something, has written down some handwritten notes and whatever, they look at me and ask me for information about myself. I'm not a medically qualified person, and I don't understand the nuances of what they probably saw in me. And if I change doctors or change countries like I have done in the past, then there is some rich information getting lost. In today's day and age, it's possible for you to predict to a great level of accuracy certain things like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's. If you're looking at brain MRIs and you're able to predict this, there's still scope for improving this and getting newer algorithms in, and there's a lot of startups across the globe working on these things. But if it's possible to do that, then I would like my doctor to also, flag it up, and especially in those things where I can, if I'm a pre-diabetic, let me give you a concrete example. Ancora Health in the Netherlands is working with pre-diabetic patients, consumers, normal people like you and me, but it could be that we might be in the pre-diabetic space. So the government of Netherlands will actually reimburse it if they provide them with support and get them out of the pre-diabetic into a normal population. And they have AI that helps them, bioinformatics and AI that helps them in changing micro habits, right? So each one of us different habits. So, Raymond might have just done a marathon last week. So I might not have moved at all. So for me, moving up the scale is probably just making sure I eat, more fruits and more vegetables for the next 1 week or 1 month. That itself will probably improve and AI can help you figure out where you are today and make that small change momentarily, right? And those are the kind of things that are possible today, right? And these didn't even exist a few years ago. And when such things are possible, then your business leaders would want their partners like GBS to step in and help them with some of these things, right? Whatever then we help that they need. It cannot be that you're sitting back and saying, I'm going to be a doctor like I was 10 years ago, and I'm continuing going to be a doctor in the next day. The doctors also need to improve their skills, find out what's available, because the reimbursements will start taking in. Most of these things take place much later, right? After everything is proven and verified is when the population gets to see it. But as business leaders and as GBS partnering with business leaders, you've got to make these investments ahead of the curve to stay relevant. If you're not doing this in 5 or 10 years time, you might not be around. I mean, that's the the message is fairly strong, but you cannot say just because you're measuring me this way, therefore I cannot do any of this. You've got to have hard conversations with the business leaders. You need to look at where they will need help in a 5-year time frame, and you need to position your GBS as we could help you in those places only if you're investing in these areas, and we can start showing results in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months in some of these areas because of data scientists coming in. But the bigger impact for you is in a 3 to 5 year time frame. Here's the kind of benefits the organization can get if we work together. That conversation, it's a tough, hard conversation, but it's got to be had. If you don't have that conversation, you will be irrelevant in a 5 to 10 year time frame. And that fairly strong words, but that's how I feel about it. That you cannot say I will do things the way I was doing it in the past. I'm not going to learn new things, and I still want to be part of your, core team 5 years later. It's just not going to work.
Yep, makes sense.
If I can just chime in,
sure, Raymond. And while you chime in, Raymond, let's also hear your views from a customer experience, because that's one area that AI is making big impact on, or big influences. So
yeah, sure. I couldn't agree more. And I think the few terms that you used, as a lead up to this discussion was, we spoke about shared services, and then, we also spoke about GBS, and if we can try to draw a line, when we first started the shared services business, it was driven by cost, right? And then as we moved along, and then we said, hey, we're not going to call it SSO anymore, we're going to call it GBS. A group of consultants came together and said, let's not call SSO anymore, it's a bad word, we'll call it GBS. But if you really looked at GBS, the focus was no longer on cost, but on experience. And that was driving the GBS, and the whole GBS format change and SSO change evolved to GBS because the focus was no longer purely on cost. And I think today, even in my business, as we move, and, even Malaysia today, we're talking about, we're not talking about GBS anymore, we're talking about digital GBS. And I think all the other countries are similar, talking about the same thing. And again, I go back to my earlier point about innovation and insights, and Gopi, you touched on it as well. The value of GBS companies cannot be just purely on cost and cannot be purely based on experience. Now, value creation has to come. It has to be driven by value now. And where does that come from? I see that value in insights. I see the value in innovations. The innovations give you the insights. And that's where you have these new roles now coming in, a data scientist, you have actuarial science coming in, doing profit modeling to some of the work that you're doing. These are roles that I never thought that we would hire in CX. But really, this is what's happening today. And we are forced to deliver value. So while we have the soft skills, the empathy, the passion, and the trust I spoke earlier, if we focus on innovation and insights, you need these new roles. And I think it's so crucial. If not, Gopi put it, at the end of the day, you'll be irrelevant, because that's where this business is heading. You need to deliver value. Back to your conversation on CX, and where, I think there's a lot of talk about conversation AI. There's a lot of talk about natural language processing, and especially sentiment analysis. And these are really, things that make it so important, for us. And I say, as an organization, I have one client that, that we deal with almost 500,000 interactions a month or more, just from one single client, right? And to comb through that data is so difficult. How many irate customers, how many call because, or really more importantly, in the past, if the conversation was taking longer than usual, your team manager would go in and knock on the shoulder of your executive and say, something not right? Why is this conversation too long? Do you have an irate customer? But today, with sentiment analysis going on, live conversational AI and NLP, you'll be able to pick up on the blind, whether there's an angry customer on the other end, without even having to hear a single word of the conversation, right? You have systems that can actually tell you that, hey, there's a potential angry customer on the other side. So these things become so important, so crucial today, and it's changing the way we work. Definitely, the tools that we use, even in CX management, is changing. But I suppose therein lies the beauty of this business, as it gets a little bit more complex than it was in many years ago, right? You get to work with these tools, you get to work with so much more intelligence. Data is at your fingertips, if I dare say that, and what you use, how you use that data at your fingertips becomes the differentiator. You could choose to just leave it as it is and ignore, or you can act on it. And I think that's the biggest difference, between different service providers, and you see how you use that data, and the innovativeness in being able to use that data at your disposal. That is the differentiator. Yeah, I'll pause here.
Excellent. Now, I was just looking at the watch, and we have come to the hour mark, and we have another few minutes to go. If we were to visualize and look at 10 years down the line, right? From a shared services perspective, what do you think will change, and what do you think will stay the same? So, maybe Gopi, if you want to take a stab at it, and then I'll come to Raymond on the same question.
Sure. I think the only thing that'll stay common is you have to be a close business partner to the business leaders, right? So you should be really relevant to what's driving the core business. So you have to be very closely aligned with this business strategy and the business leaders. That's the part which will be common. But what would change, in my view, would be the application of technology and the kind of things that we would be doing, and the mix of people and the skill sets that we would have. The team would look reasonably different from what it is right now. So you would have for it to survive, it needs to have a combination of very, very strong excellence in delivery. Will always be one of the pillars, but there should be a very strong, using Raymond's words, insights and innovation driving machines embedded in this GBS. And if that's how I see it in a 5 to 10 year time frame, right? So this would be strongly embedded in a smart way, and how that happens is something that we'll have to wait and see, and how long it takes. But it has to be significantly embedded in GBS for it to be effective in a 5 to 10 year time frame.
Thank you for that, Raymond.
Well, this is a tough one, I like to let me sort of maybe paraphrase that question a little bit. I like to see the day, I don't know whether in this day and age we can use the word slave, but let me use it loosely, and forgive me if I hurt anyone's feelings. But I like to see a day when we have a personal boss for ourselves. Call it a master-slave relationship, We walk into an interview. If I'm an accountant, I'm going to walk in with a bot that can do some very transactional stuff. I walk into an interview and say, this is what I've programmed my bot to do. My bot can do blah, blah, it's able to come out with your profit and loss account and whatever not, right? And all these reports would be done by the bot. And I am here to interpret those data, and I think, I'd like to see a day when GBS executives walk into a room for an interview and say, here am I, and here is my bot, and this is my personal bot, my personal slave, and this is what it's going to do it for me. I like to see that day happening. I think at the moment we have a lot of enterprise bots, but I hope to see the day when all of us speak in coding languages. We can do simple, or a lot of stuff are now being done without even having coding knowledge, right? Being able to personalize your own bots and be able to do the work that you're doing very differently, and I don't know, 20-25 years from now, I hope to see that, if I'm around. But yes, I like to see that day coming, Anirvan.
I really love that idea, and maybe I'll call it the alter ego instead of a slave. But I
for
know,
lack of a better word.
yes, but I know the day it's going to happen. It's going to happen on day 3. Mark my words. So. Well, excellent. So now, before we start wrapping up, any final thoughts on the topic? And before I ask you that question on the books, your favorite books, so which is part of my favorite part of my interview. So, any final thoughts on the topic before we go? So, Gopi.
Yeah. So I the only thing that I have is fear shouldn't drive our business lives, right? So that's and if we feel apprehensive about something, we need to confront that. I mean, not just and so if there are things that we feel worried about, then it's best to meet the experts in that area. People are open to talk to us. So, best to meet those experts and see how we can move our micro habits and get better at that, right? So not to be worried about these. So I would really say we got to be in the driver's seat, hold the bull by the horns, and then move forward rather than sit and worry about what might happen and what could happen. And we have to drive what's going to happen in the future. And we have to work with the next generation. So we shouldn't be too worried about every time the next generation will have better skills in most things. I mean, even if you see simple things like Olympic records, the rate at which they get broken, you cannot expect the previous generation to even compete with what happens. But we need to figure out a way of how do you build on that and how do you take things forward, because the younger generation would not have the breadth of business experience and other things that we have accumulated over a period of time. The question is, how do we build all of this and make it more beneficial to society as we move forward, right? And so fear doesn't help anyone. So if you're worried about something, just confront it, get on with it, and what small changes can you make in yourself is a question that you got to ask yourself and jump in, right? I mean, that's where I come from.
Yeah, absolutely. Fear does not help. Absolutely. Raymond, what are your final thoughts?
I think I just want to share something that, perhaps has been a lesson for me in the last 2 years. I think just before the pandemic happened, if all our conversations were revolved around a VUCA world and, how things would change and how machines would change things, and indeed it has, and indeed it will. But I think what has taught me so much in the last 2 years is the fundamentals, the basics become so much more important. How empathy has become so much more important in the last 2 years. How building the trust has become so important. How that passion in your interacting with your people, whether it's your employees or your bosses or within your family, has become so important. So I think this 2 years at least, hopefully has taught us that let's not be fearful of this new machines or these new animals, so to speak, right? Because fundamentally, the human touch is always still going to be there and is needed. And these 2 years has taught us that. So, it's all about how do you build this symbiotic relationship. So I'm going to, leave that, with that thought, how the conversation should be, how are we going to coexist? How are we going to build a symbiotic relationship? Not about, competing against the other and saying, you're better than me, I'm better than you, and that for me has been a lesson that I've learned in the last 2 years, really.
Wonderful. How to sort of coexist or live symbiotically. Yeah. So two sort of great points to end the conversation on the topic itself. But before we actually end the session, let's talk about some of your favorite books. So, Gopi, did you come up with your collection?
No, I mean, I should admit that the biggest part of my reading while I was traveling like crazy was all the books that you see at the airports, which is the bestseller list of. And they're fantastic because you have time on the flight when you're going from one place to another. And so those are the things that I've been reading, and I just read up everything that comes up. So it's like sometimes, the last couple of years while staying just at home and I haven't traveled at all, it's probably every time a bookshop opens, I go pick it up because I also like the idea of browsing and looking at it. So you could always get it on Amazon, but I like the idea of hanging around and reading those books. But after 2 full years of just staying at home with this is my daughter's room that I use as my office right now, with this blue background, semi-blue background. That after the first trip that I've actually made was to Amsterdam the past 10 days. And it has energized me so much, just meeting people, talking to people, and, spending some time catching up with people. It's just energized me so much, which none of these books have done in the past 2 years. Usually they energize me when I'm when I'm traveling and so on, right? But while you're stuck and you're reading all of this, it's just kind of not as good as, so it's a combination. So I'm going to not quote any of my business books, and I'm just going to go with some of the classics. Take a Macbeth and relook at it, right? And you see that people who choose ambition over values, right, carry that guilt. That's what Shakespeare was referring to at that point in time. You have, you are doing something to meet your goals, or doing something to meet somebody else's goals who's close to you in your life, and you never come to grips with it or accept it because the rest of your life is on guilt and worry and insecurity and problems and so on. So, if you have a past, or if you've made decisions in the past along those lines, clean that up and move forward and realize that, which is probably what we've learned in the past 2 years too, is that some of the human relationships and some of the what's important for you, what are the values that you believe in, what are the things that you believe in are more important than just your goals, right? So for you to have peace of mind, to feel comfortable with yourself, you've got to really address your basics, your emotions, and make sure that you have a fabulous life irrespective of your achievements in the world, right? So these are basic stuff, not necessarily this book. I think the past couple of years have helped me revisit some of the classics and learn that, just being yourself, being true to yourself, and being, attached to your values, and using some of the words that Raymond used, empathy, trust, passion. These are probably a lot more important for us as human beings than just achievements or even building companies and so on. So if you can do both, great, but not while compromising your core values. Building anything just leads to more problems and so on. And I refer to the classics here because that doesn't change irrespective of what your world is. Going back to a Macbeth and looking at the lessons from that always helps a great deal, because things don't change too much in a few hundred years. But so sticking to our values, those are the things that have been exciting to me.
That's very interesting to learn, Gopi, about your books and Macbeth and Shakespearean. So maybe next time when we speak, we're going to hear some more Shakespearean wisdom, and maybe this time it's going to be Merchant of Venice. Raymond.
When you're traveling like crazy, you don't have time to revisit the classics, right? I read all the airport books. That's all I do, right? So anything that comes up, the bestseller, everything that our business guys write, we read it. And sometimes it's good to take a step back and revisit the classics, because there's a reason why they're the classics.
Sure. Raymond, how about you?
Yeah, I won't go far back as to Shakespeare and Macbeth, but I would grab hold of any autobiography. That's my area. Not so much into fiction, but I love autobiographies. If I see them, I pick them up, especially interesting people. I like to learn from experience, from the others, and that's always been there. But I think if there was one particular book, I will say that probably transformed or played a very important role as an entrepreneur was perhaps Good to Great by Jim Collins. That is something that I mentioned this earlier. I wasn't someone at 21 said that I would be an entrepreneur. I evolved into that role over a period of 30 years. And I think sometimes, the first thing I always share this with a lot of people, that, when the first day I went for my accounting class, and the lecturer said, when in doubt, always take the proven path. So it's always about being risk adverse. It's always about, being more prudent. And sometimes when you come from that background and your formative years were formed in that way, it's quite difficult to make that leap. And that book played an instrumental role for me to say that, take that leap of faith. Let's see what happens. And there was so much that I saw in the industry at that point in time. There was so much of gaps that I saw, that I felt that much could be done. And that book really inspired me to sort of say, hey, look, let's try our hand at day 3 and becoming an entrepreneur, so to speak. But that's really that. And really, just like Gopi, try to get as much knowledge from a lot of readings that you get while you're traveling, and magazines are always the easy reads in short flights, and longer flights. The book. But you try to get as much as knowledge possible, from all these resources.
Wonderful. And literally that brings me to the last question. Some people may be interested in having a conversation with you guys. What's the best way that they can get in touch, Raymond?
LinkedIn would be good. All my details are there. And I respond. I think I respond quite promptly over LinkedIn. Yes, LinkedIn is the best way of getting hold of me.
Excellent. And Gopi, how about you?
LinkedIn. I think I'll connect with you soon, Raymond. And as soon as Malaysia opens up travel for, I don't know if it's already done, but I'll come and visit you sometime. It'll be great to learn a little
1st of April, Gopi, so you have no excuse. We open up 1st of April. So
okay. We'll do that. I'll definitely visit you. LinkedIn is the best, Anirban. I think that's the best way to be in touch.
Yep. Absolutely, and I think we should make a plan. Go to KL and have some nasi kandar and enjoy the food there. So, but this has been awesome. Thank you so much, both Raymond and Gopi. This is not an easy conversation, an easy topic to talk about, especially trying to bring in both perspectives, because the world has become suddenly, all of a sudden, especially over the last 5-10 years, have become polarized when it comes to AI, especially the world of shared services. And for them to get this perspective, different ways of looking at it, is important. And I hope people who would be watching this in the future, or who are already watching it, can completely sort of understand and relate to what you guys said. The future is going to be extremely interesting. Pandemic has shown us that VUCA world is not a concept or a theory, but a reality. The current geopolitical scenario has further strengthened the fact that we are going to live in a much more uncertain world. And this is where technology is, or needs to be seen as something that we need to take benefit from and work with, rather than looking at as an adversary. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me, with those words, bring the session to end. Thank you again, Raymond and Gopi, for being the panelists for today's discussion. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Anirudh.
Thank you.
Gopi,
Thank
it
you
was a
for
real
having
pleasure.
us.